public portion of the defense for Amrita Mittal. You may also know her as Amrita Lankar, so she was not married too long ago. And she's going to be giving her presentation on simulation for planetary entry. And before I make a brief introduction for Amrita, I'd like to introduce the members of the defense committees. The committees being chaired by Professor Capelli from mechanical engineering, and then from right to left or left to right on your side, Professor Sigurd Clark from aeronautics and astronautics, Professor Bob McCormack, Dr. Francisco Palacios, and myself. So I think this is when we embarrass the candidate a little bit, but I won't do that. About 3.5 years ago, Professor Springer came to me and said, I have this wonderful student who wants to do something that I cannot help her with. Will you be interested in talking to her? And Amrita came to my office, and she was obviously, as most of you know, effervescent about her knowledge about doing something, and she wanted to design wind turbines, and not only that, but she wanted to design them with computation, she wanted to do some experiments, and she wanted to do everything in about the 3 years she had left in her PhD. So we started working on that, and she was very interested in applying plasma control to wind turbines, and during the process, we discovered that many of the models that existed out there that we thought we wanted to use were not really that good after all. So then her work deviated towards doing more fundamental simulations of flows that involve plasma, and then in a sort of circuitous way, we ended up talking about simulations of planetary entry and some of the high-speed effects that come in with that. So it's been an interesting journey, and we've had a wonderful time working on these topics, and she's been one of the most interesting and fun students to work with. I think most of the people in our lab know that she's been the spirit of the lab together with Tom Taylor for the last few years. Without her, all our social activities are going to disappear, but we'll try to do something. And I have to tell you that she's had reach beyond her lab. So even my 9-year-old daughter this morning, when she found out that Amrita was defending, she said to me in a very worried look, is she really going to defend and going away? And I said, well, maybe. And she's like, oh, I'm going to miss Amrita. So we're definitely going to miss you. But we're going to leave it in your hands. Please go on with the presentation.
Thank you, Professor Alonso. Good afternoon, everyone. I've waited for this day for the past 6 years, and I'm really glad you all are here to share it with me. Today, I'm going to talk about my work in simulating the environment a spacecraft experiences as it enters a planet's atmosphere, and how the environment affects the spacecraft. Atmospheric entry is encountered in several space missions, whether it's when the astronauts are returning from the International Space Station, or a shuttle is returning after having serviced a space telescope, or when we venture out to explore a solar system. We want to land on different planets and their moons. Atmospheric entry is encountered in such situations. Maybe I can turn off the lights. And in the future, when space tourism grows, we will be needing atmospheric entry will be encountered in bringing people back from the low Earth orbit after a joyride. So why is atmospheric entry so challenging? It can be probably termed as one of the most dangerous part of dangerous phases of a space mission. And let's take a look at why. What makes it so complex? Here are some of the flow features that occur around a spacecraft when it enters the atmosphere. Before I begin, I want to point out that in my PhD, I'm only going to focus on the features that lie ahead of the spacecraft. So, because it's traveling faster than the speed of sound, a bow shock appears in front of it. What the shock wave does is, behind the shock wave, the temperatures rise to very high temperatures, which are high enough to cause chemical dissociation and ionization in the flow. Let's take a bit of a detailed look into what that is. Shown here is a spacecraft with a bow shock, behind which the temperatures are very high, because of which the molecules of the planet's atmosphere have ionized to produce ions and electrons, shown by the pink and blue circles. Each of these different types of chemical species has its own temperature, and they interact with one another via chemical reactions. That's when we say that these gases are in thermochemical non-equilibrium. Other effects that appear are shock layer radiation. The Mach numbers associated with these flows are so high that the temperatures inside the shock layer are so high that thermal radiation comes into play. Also, the walls of the spacecraft are cooler than the gases surrounding them, which promotes surface recombination. That is, the charged particles come close to the surface and recombine to produce neutral particles. That has to be taken, that is also an important feature. Also, these flows, even though they are very high speed flows, their temperatures are very high, which makes the viscosity in these flows very large. And we deal with very small densities, which makes the Reynolds number of these flows from laminar to transitional. That's why viscous interactions become very important. So the three main issues that I see from these complex physics are: first, the temperatures are very high. We must equip the spacecraft with a thermal protection system to protect it from the amount of heating. Second, we're still traveling many times faster than the speed of sound. We must slow down to be able to land within a few minutes, maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes. And third, chemical reactions, ionization occurs. What that does is, it has both good points and bad points. Ionization causes radio blackout. That is, the production of charged species, namely the electrons, forms a thin sheath around the spacecraft, which blocks all radio communication to and from the spacecraft. So here we are traveling many times faster than the speed of sound in gases that are very hot without the ability to communicate with ground, which is bad. However, ionization also helps in lowering the temperature of the gases, because this process requires energy to extract an electron out of a molecule. And this energy is taken from the flow, due to which the temperature of the flow decreases. So when we want to design spacecraft, we have to address these issues for a good design. So the problem we have on hand is, we know the spacecraft's geometry, we know the speed it's moving with, and we know what atmosphere we are going to. So we know the conditions of that atmosphere. What we want to find out are the characteristics in this ionized region, that is, characteristics of the distribution of temperature, pressure, density, velocity of each of the chemical species. And I say each of the chemical species because every species has a different temperature, density, pressure, and each one of them transfers heat to the spacecraft and applies forces. So we to estimate the total effect on the spacecraft, we need to take into account each of the individual species. The way to do that is, we can either do empirically, that is run tests. However, running tests in space are difficult. First, because we only have a few past missions that we can get data from. Second, data acquisition in those environments is very difficult because of the harsh conditions. For example, MEDLI, that is the Mars Entry, Descent, Landing Instrumentation, which was on the Mars Science Laboratory, was allowed to have only 20 sensors. 7 pressure sensors, 7 thermocouples, and a few recession sensors. In addition, whatever data is collected is a cumulative effect of everything that goes around the spacecraft. It's very difficult to know what caused what. And lastly, these experiments are very expensive. It takes a few years of preparation to get one going. We can also run tests in laboratory, which is very good because that way we can run customized tests to understand certain behavior as well. However, the problem with that is we can only test small scale structures, and it's difficult to match the Reynolds number and Mach number to full scale spacecraft. Plus, these facilities to run the laboratory tests are also very limited. There are only a few hypersonic testing wind tunnels or arc jet tunnels around the world. So the second approach, which is probably cheaper, is modeling. We can numerically model these flows. And that is what I have done in my PhD. I've taken the modeling approach. But before I go into that, I want to say that these are not independent of one another. We can only trust modeling simulation results after we have validated it with data from experiments. So let's take a look at, we want to model these flows, let's take a look at some of the challenges associated with this. The problem of atmospheric entry is multi-physics, meaning we are definitely moving in a gaseous atmosphere, so we have to deal with fluid dynamics. The gases are chemically reacting, so we have to invoke chemical models. And third, There's presence of charged particles, which calls for classical electrodynamics. Now, each of these fields has further problems. Let's take a look at first fluid dynamics. To calculate the problem with fluid dynamics is this system of equations is very large. Why I say that is, first, there are multiple species. We want to estimate the properties of each of these species. That can be done by solving a full set of conservation laws for each species. That is, solve for mass, momentum, and energy of each species. This makes the system of equations large. 5 because 3 times momentum and mass and energy. 5 times n species. And these equations are coupled and nonlinear, which makes solving them difficult. Let's take a look at the chemical models. Chemical models are required because the various species collide with one another, interact, they undergo chemical reactions, momentum exchange via collision, energy exchange, and all these relations must be included in the fluid dynamic equations to account for the species interactions. The addition of chemical models to the fluid dynamic equations makes the fluid dynamic equations numerically very stiff because these are very strong interactions. And lastly, we have to couple the system of equations with Maxwell's equations to simulate the behavior of charged particles. Charged particles induce electromagnetic fields, and those induced electromagnetic fields in turn affect the behavior of the charged particles. So these equations have to be coupled with the fluid dynamic equations, which makes the complex system of equations more complex. Therefore, traditionally simplifications have been made to this problem to simulate such flows, which takes me to some of the previous work that has been done in this field. The way researchers have modeled these flows for the past 25 years is they treat all the gases as one mixture, solve for the mean properties of the gases, and the properties of the individual species are calculated by invoking a diffusion model. So individual species properties are this mean average properties plus a diffusion model. This is done to reduce the total number of equations from 5 times n species to something like n species plus 4, which is huge if n species is 7, 11, or 13 sometimes, or 5. This simplification of the fluid dynamic equations, that is treating the whole gas as a mixture, also simplifies the chemical model, because now we are not treating each of the species individually. We don't have to account for the interactions such as momentum exchange or energy exchange between the species. And this simplification of the chemical model reduces the stiffness in the fluid dynamic equations too. And lastly, sometimes it is assumed that there are no induced electromagnetic fields. That is, we do not have to solve Maxwell's equations. These simplifications were proposed by Lee in 1985 and have since been used by the widely used codes such as the DPLR code at NASA Ames and LoRa code at NASA Langley. The DPLR code was used to design the heat shield of MSL, Mars Science Laboratory, the Orion spacecraft. It was also used in the analysis of the Columbia space shuttle accident. LoRa is a similar code at NASA Langley. It was the efforts on LoRa started in 1987. So these are well-established codes that use this kind of a formulation, the drift diffusion formulation. Let's take a look at some of the results using this. Shown here is this was a simulation done by Gnofo et al. Of the entry of the Stardust capsule into Earth. Stardust capsule entered the atmosphere of Earth in 2006, and it is the fastest atmospheric entry into Earth. The simulations they did was for Mach 34, and they measured the heat flux along the front surface of the capsule. Shown here is the data. X-axis is along the front face, and on the y-axis is the heat flux in megawatts per meter square, using 3 different diffusion models. And we see there is first thing we notice is there is a variation of about 3 times difference between the heat flux predicted by the diffusion models. Now, we do know that one model is more accurate than the other. However, this does introduce uncertainty in our analysis, how much heat is transferred to the vehicle. and this sometimes can be very undesirable. Shown here is the heat shield of the Galileo probe, which entered the atmosphere of Jupiter in 1995. It was traveling at velocity of 47 kilometers per second. The heat shield was designed keeping from the analysis that the maximum heating would be expected near the nose. So more material was added near the nose. This is before entry and this is after entry. And it was expected that less heating would take place near the frustum, so less material there. However, after the entry, it was realized that yes, heating did take place, and there was a recession at the stagnation point. However, heating at the frustum was comparable to the amount at the stagnation point. After re-entry, after atmospheric entry, only 1 centimeter of material was left. We were fortunate here. However, these effects can be undesirable in such missions. So the solution to that is we can add a larger margin of safety, that is, add more material to it, but it just increases the weight of every mission and cost associated with these. So to address the problem of these associated with these simplified equations, McCormack et al. In 2011 solved the full set of conservation laws for each species. That is, they treated each species individually, solved a full set of fluid dynamic equations for each species, took into account the full chemical models, that is, interaction between species via transfer between species, momentum transfer between species via collision, and energy transfer. And they also included the effects of induced electric fields. However, the limitations of this approach were, first, it was one-dimensional. Second, they solved it for an unsteady problem only. And third, they were dealing with the monatomic gases. In my PhD, I have developed a three-dimensional framework for solving the physics of hypersonic flows, treating each species individually to a steady state for complex geometries. So the objective of my research is to calculate the steady state conditions in 3 dimensions, treating each species individually within desired accuracy and reasonable computer time for complex geometries. Just to highlight some of my contributions, I solve a full set of fluid dynamic equations for every chemical species, tightly coupled with chemical models to account for interspecies interactions, and Gauss's law, tightly coupled Gauss's law to account for induced electric fields. Then in the process, I also formulate the boundary conditions for every species, including the characteristic-based boundary conditions and cold-walled catalytic boundary conditions. Then I implemented these equations, the full set of fluid dynamic equations and the chemical models and Gauss's law, in a generalized framework for any mixture of gases on unstructured meshes in 3D, and the code is capable of running in parallel. And lastly, a detailed verification and validation of the equations and the numerical procedure was done with published data. The way to solve this is, first I'm going to formulate the equations, including the equations for fluid dynamics, the chemical model, and Gauss's law for induced electric fields, and I will show the coupling between the three. The fluid dynamic equations were formulated by Navier and Stokes, and they are defined here on a control volume omega, which belongs to a 3-dimensional space for time greater than 0. U is the vector of unknowns and consists of a variable for mass, momentum in every direction, so 3, and energy for every chemical species. Since we have more than one number of species, we have to take we have unknown variables for every species. Fc is the vector of convective fluxes, and it is a non-linear function of the unknowns, that is, which makes these equations non-linear. I'm going to skip Fb, which are the viscous fluxes, just like the regular Navier-Stokes, and go straight to the vector Q, which is the vector of source terms. This is how the various species interact with one another. This has contributions for all species again. First, let me take a look at the first variable in this vector, W1 dot. It is W1 dot represents the net production of species 1 from chemical reactions. On the second row, we have two variables. The first one represents the electric forces on the charged species due to induced electric fields. The second term on the second row represents momentum exchange via collision between species. On the third row, we have three terms. The first one represents the work done by induced electric fields. The second and third represent energy exchange via collision, both translational and both kinetic and internal energy exchange. These equations are solved with the appropriate boundary conditions, which include characteristic-based boundary conditions for individual species and cold wall recombinations for cold walls. I will talk about how I formulate the characteristic-based boundary conditions a bit later. First, let me look at the catalytic walls. The flux of first we calculate the flux of electrons towards the wall. Because of the small mass of electrons, the flux of electrons is very large compared to the flux of ions. This means a thin sheath of electrons forms around the solid walls, which means every ion that comes towards the wall finds an electron and recombines to produce a neutral atom. This is included as a boundary condition in the mass conservation equations for each of the species. Mass production for the neutral species and depletion for electrons and ions at the wall. Next, we go on to quickly look at the chemistry of these species. This is divided into 4 parts. The first part shows the production of mass of the various species. This is just given by the chemical rate reactions in Arrhenius form and includes all the reactions in which the particular species appears either as a reactant or as a product. The second term includes Lorentz forces and Joule heating on the charged particles. The third box here shows the momentum transfer between species via collision. And the fourth term here shows internal energy transfer via collision between the various species. And the last part we have is Gauss's law, that is used to calculate the electric fields induced by any separation of charge in the flow. Gauss's law relates a charge to the electric fields it induces by this equation, where rho c is the difference between the number of charge difference between positive and negative charge, and is provided by the solution of Navier-Stokes equations. Gauss's law in turn provides the distribution of electric fields, and the two set of equations, Navier-Stokes and Gauss's law, are coupled such that, first I want to say this, that Navier-Stokes equations are time dependent, while Gauss's law is not. Therefore, at every time iteration of the fluid dynamic equations, the Navier-Stokes equations, we solve for a converged solution of Gauss's law, which provides the distribution of electric field for the Navier-Stokes equations, which in turn provide the distribution of charge, net charge in the flow. So now we have formulated the equations. Let's take a look at how to discretize these equations. But before that, I will highlight some of the numerical challenges we face. As I said, the number of equations is very large because we are solving a full set of Navier-Stokes equations for every species, tightly coupled with Gauss's law. Second, these equations are very stiff because of the chemical source terms. The various species interact with one another. These interactions are strong and the induced electric forces are large, which makes the equations stiff. Third, the flows, hypersonic flows, are weakly ionized flows. That means there is a large difference between the density of the charged species and the neutral particles. This variation in density produces stiffness in the numerical stiffness in the linearized system of equations. And these flows are very viscous because we have low density, high temperatures, and sometimes the boundary layers are so thick that the shock wave lies inside the boundary layer. A shock wave produces a large jump in temperature and pressure across it, and these shock waves, because are very strong, lie very close to the solid bodies, solid walls. What this does is the walls are generally cooler we have a very strong gradient of temperature right next to the wall, which produces a very large gradient of temperature near the wall, and a very tight mesh spacing is required to resolve it to predict heat transfers accurately. Then, because of the difference in density between the various species, the Reynolds number of these flows of the various species is very different, and which makes choosing a single mesh for all the species difficult. Lastly, there is there is a wide variation in the timescales of Gauss's law and fluid dynamic equations. Fluid dynamic equations are time dependent, while Gauss's law is not. And the meshes we use for the fluid dynamic equations are stretched so that we are able to resolve the gradients in normal direction well. However, those meshes are not optimum for the solution of Gauss's law, where we use finite element methods. Also, these species, one species has different density from the other, but they are not independent of one another. They interact with one another, because of which the stability in one species, which can be much larger than the other, affects it. So we have to watch the solution that all the species are being advanced stably, and advancing one too fast can lead to negative pressures in the other species. And lastly, the Mach number of these species varies over 3 orders of magnitude. This is because the electrons have a very small mass. That is, let me show you with an example here. Consider a neutral particle, an atom traveling at 5 kilometers per second and 300 Kelvin, and an electron at the same speed and temperature. The mass of electrons is 5 orders of magnitude smaller than the neutral particle. This makes the speed of sound in electrons 2 orders of magnitude larger. Thus, for the same speed and temperature, the Mach number in electrons is about 3 or 2 orders of magnitude smaller, very small compared to the other species. So, all these challenges that the equation set is very large, the various species have different densities, their acoustic speeds are very large, makes these solving these equations numerically very challenging. With this, I'll go on to how to discretize these equations. The equations have been solved on a median dual volume that is constructed by connecting the cell centroids, face centers, and edge midpoints, and is shown in with the red volume here. We use a vertex-based scheme, that is the unknowns and the pressure, temperature are stored at the nodes. The flux shown here is a semi-discretized Navier-Stokes equations, and the fluxes Fc and Fp are discretized along the edges of the primal mesh, that is perpendicular to the faces of the dual mesh. The convective fluxes are discretized using Rose flux difference splitting scheme, and are shown denoted by Fc here. They are constructed from variables at point I and j and their neighbors for higher order accuracy. And the second term here is added to add more stability to the scheme. The matrix A is the Jacobian of the convective fluxes with respect to the conserved variables constructed using row average variables. However, as I said that some of the species have a very small Mach number. At very small Mach numbers, the artificial dissipation, that is the matrix A, scales as 1 over Mach number. That means at very small Mach numbers, the dissipation is large, and this corrupts the solution of electrons if the standard technique is used. We cannot also use an incompressible formulation for the electrons because their density is changing with temperature because of chemical reactions. Therefore, we have used a preconditioning fix to the artificial viscosity, the Rotherham fix, which scales the artificial viscosity of electrons at low Mach numbers so that it is not very dissipative, while at larger Mach numbers greater than 0.1, it reassumes the form of Rose scheme. Let us take a look at how that has helped us. I did this experiment where we had a solid body sitting in a free stream of ionized argon gas at 2500 Kelvin. Pressure was 28 pascals. The free stream velocity was 2500 meters per second and Mach number was 2.7. And here are the convergence histories of the electrons and ions. Let's take a look at electrons first. We call a solution converged after the maximum error anywhere in the domain has dropped by about 6, 7, 8 orders of magnitude. On the x-axis here is the number of iterations. On the y-axis is the maximum error in density normalized by the free stream density. And I computed this using Rose scheme and Rho-Turkel preconditioning. And I see that after about 5 orders of magnitude, the error in the electrons it just stalled. While with Rho-Turkel preconditioning, we were able to obtain a fully converged solution. Now we only require this fix for the electrons because their Mach numbers are very small. However, they interact with the other chemical species too, which are heavier, which are supersonic and do not need this fix. But improvement in the solution of the electrons also helps in improving the solution in the ions, which is shown here. The x-axis is the number of iterations, y-axis is the maximum error in density of the ions. And we see that without using preconditioning in the electrons, the error in ions also stalled, while with preconditioning we were able to fully converge it. A similar behavior was also seen in the neutral particles, which were also supersonic. So with the convective fluxes done, now the viscous fluxes were discretized using central difference method. The discretization of viscous fluxes requires calculation of the flow gradients at node I and J, which was calculated using weighted least squares method. The vector of source terms Q was discretized using piecewise constant method, meaning it was assumed constant in a dual control volume. This semi-discretized equation was integrated in time using implicit methods. And for steady state conditions, we used convergence acceleration techniques such as local time stepping, and we also advanced each of the species at its own maximum allowable time step, which was stable for the other species too. In the end, the linearized system of equations could be solved by LUSGS, lower upper symmetric Gauss-Seidel method, or by conjugate gradient stabilized method. Now calculation, the use of implicit methods was required because these equations are very stiff. We wanted to take large time steps to converge to a steady state. But using implicit methods requires calculation of the Jacobian of all these terms, the fluxes and the source terms. I will talk about the fluxes a little later, but the Jacobian of the source terms was calculated, that is, the Jacobian of all the source terms with respect to all the conserved variables in 3 dimensions. I don't mean that you'll be able to read this. All I'm showing is, it's in 2D here. That we have calculated the analytical Jacobian for all the terms, and we have this, and I also cross-checked this with finite differencing in 3D. So this is just 2D. Next, we move on to the boundary conditions. The use of characteristic-based boundary conditions requires knowledge of the characteristic speeds and the directions. That is, we want to be able to estimate the eigenvalues of this matrix, eigenvalues and eigenvectors, where each of these is a 5 by 5 matrix, and we must be able to, we need expressions for all of these. However, it turns out for this formulation that this is a block diagonal matrix. That means the fluxes of one species are only a function of its conserved variables, which makes it block diagonal, and we know that the eigenvalues and vectors of a block diagonal matrix are those of the blocks, individual blocks themselves, individual blocks. Next, we have discretized these equations. Let's take a look at, quickly look at the implementation. The full set of equations were implemented in the open source suite called SU Squared. I implemented the multi-species reacting flow solver in it, which solves a full set of Navier-Stokes equations for every species tightly coupled with Gauss's law. We modeled the highest level of thermochemical non-equilibrium for continuum flows. The solver uses unstructured meshes. That means it can be used for complex geometries. It is capable of running in parallel. And the implementation of the equations are such that it is general for any number of species. My implementation is only till monatomic gases, and the extension to diatomic gases is straightforward. The difference between monatomic gases and diatomic is that monatomic gases only have one mode of energy, translation, while diatomic gases have rotational as well as vibrational energy. We must solve an additional equation for conservation of rotational and vibrational energy to model diatomic species. This implementation of the diatomic species is already in SU squared by another graduate student, Sean Copeland, and it is under testing right now for validation. So we've implemented these equations. Let's take a look at if we are solving the right equations and do these numerical procedures work. Are we able to reproduce data from experiments? To do so, I simulated 3 test cases. In the first one, I measured the heat transfer to a solid body from a stream of ionized argon, and the objective of this experiment was to test if we were solving the right equations and if we were doing it correctly. Second, if we are also modeling the effect of surface catalysis correctly. The second numerical experiment I did was to study if charge separation occurs in hypersonic flows and how does it affect the flow. The third experiment I studied was drag augmentation in presence of a magnetic field. That means a magnet was present in a solid body which applied magnetic field, and the net effect was an increase in drag. I simulated this experiment to study if we were solving the right equations and if we were modeling the charged species correctly, because charged species are affected by the presence of magnetic field. So the first experiment, that is simulate a test case for measurement of heat transfer from a stream of ionized argon and compare with results, experimental results. In the process, we wanted to test if these equations are if we are able to converge these equations to a steady state, and second, if we are modeling the viscous terms correctly. Why I say that is because viscous terms play an important role in modeling heat transfer, and this is a good test for that. This experiment was done by Novak et al. At NASA Langley, where they measured the heat flux along the nose of a solid body from a free stream of ionized argon gas at temperature 810 Kelvin, pressure was 302 pascals, the free stream velocity was 2400 meters per second, density was low at 1.6 times 10 to the power negative 4 kilograms per meter cube. The free stream Mach number was 4.6 and the free stream was 1% ionized. We simulate this experiment and measure the heat flux. The numerical method, yes, first as I said the density was low. We wanted to make sure that continuum exists at such low densities because we cannot use fluid dynamic equations to model flows that where continuum fails. So we calculated the Knudsen number, which is a ratio of the mean free path of molecules and a characteristic length of the experiment. And it turned out that in free stream, the Knudsen number was 0.015, which is much smaller than 1. We can assume continuum. Then the full set of Navier-Stokes equations were solved, including thermochemical non-equilibrium, to a steady state. The mesh used in this study was, first thing we noticed, I only simulate a part of the test body to exploit symmetry in the azimuth direction. Second, this mesh was hybrid, meaning it consisted of hexahedral cells near the solid wall and the rest was filled with prisms. Hexahedral cells are known to resolve boundary layers well, that's why we have hexahedral cells near the walls. The mesh was pre-adapted, meaning that we ran a solution and we found out the location of the shock wave, around which we added more points to be able to resolve the shock wave well. We also resolved the boundary well enough so that we have about 30 points in the boundary layer. The free stream temperature was about 800 Kelvin and the Mach number was about 5, which produced temperatures of about 5000 Kelvin right behind the shock wave. And the walls were maintained at 300 Kelvin. This produced a very large gradient in temperature right next to the walls. Therefore, a very tight spacing was required near the walls to resolve the gradient and accurately predict the heat transfer. Therefore, we used a mesh spacing of 6 times 10⁻⁻6 meters. The boundary conditions included symmetry walls, symmetry boundary conditions in the azimuth directions, catalytic here on the solid walls, and characteristic based boundaries elsewhere. Here are some of the results. First, we are looking at the results for neutral species, that is the atoms. Shown here are the Mach number distribution and the temperature distribution. First, because the free stream was at Mach 4.6, there was a bow shock appeared in front of it, across which the Mach number fell. Similarly, for the temperature, free stream temperature was about 800 Kelvin. Since there was a bow shock, the temperature increased behind the shock wave to about 5000 Kelvin. A similar behavior was noted in the ions, where we had free stream of 4.6, bow shock appeared, temperature increased behind the shock wave. However, for the electrons, as I said, their Mach number is very small. It is much smaller than 1. They too saw a shock wave-like structure when they should not have. The reason for that can be explained by looking at the distribution of temperature. Their free stream temperature was 3900 Kelvin. However, as they came in the domain, they interacted with the heavier species. They exchanged energy. The three of the species came to a thermal equilibrium, meaning that the temperature of the electrons dropped to about 800 Kelvin, and the temperatures of the heavy species, namely the atoms and ions, increased ever so slightly because the density of electrons is much smaller than the other two species. And similarly, behind the shock wave, they came to a thermal equilibrium with the rest of the species of about 5000 Kelvin. This increase in temperature behind the location of the shock wave for the ions and neutral particles caused a decrease in the Mach number behind the shock wave. Sorry. With the heat transfer to the solid walls was calculated as the sum from the neutral particles, ions, as well as electrons. So it was summed for all the species to calculate the net heat transfer. And here are some results comparison with the experiment. On the x-axis is the angle theta, that is denoted here. On the y-axis is the net heat flux in megawatt per meter square. The open circles are the experiment, and the line through it is my simulation. And we see we are able to predict the heat flux well. It is the maximum near the nose, and it drops till when we go to the periphery. So just to know that if we needed to solve this large system of equations, or if we could just do with a single species Navier-Stokes equations, I also ran a single species Navier-Stokes equations without considering the effect of ionization and electrons. And we see that with that we are not able to match experimental data well. So this experiment was used to validate the solution procedure, the equations and the numerical procedure, including the boundary conditions. And we also see that a multi-species formulation is required to predict heat flux in ionized flows. The second numerical experiment I did was I simulated the flow past a normal shock wave moving at Mach 15. Shock wave is encountered when a spacecraft enters an atmosphere, and this is the strongest. The shock wave, and this is the strongest near the nose. That is the gradients of temperature, the increase in temperature behind the shock wave is highest there. And I simulate the flow across this. So this was this test setup. We had unionized argon gas coming from left to right. The Mach number was 15 and the temperature of the gas was 300 Kelvin. Behind the normal shock, the temperature increased to 33,000 Kelvin, enough to cause ionization in the flow and produce ions and electrons. We simulate this flow to see what happens at such high temperatures. So the full set of fluid dynamic equations were solved for individual species, coupled with thermochemical non-equilibrium chemical models. Since it was an unsteady problem, time-accurate solutions were required. We also coupled the equations with Gauss's law for prediction of induced electric fields. And for numerical purposes, we assumed that there was a very small density of ions and electrons coming in from left too, because for numerical purposes, we cannot assume a zero density. And here are some of the results. What we are looking at is, first the x-axis is the domain length. X equal to 0 corresponds to the location of the shock wave. On the y-axis is the temperature, and we see it's a very large range. There are three lines here. Black denotes the electrons, the green are the ions, and red are the neutral particles. This is a movie. I'll show you what happens to the temperature of the various species, but I want to point out that this is for, sorry, let me go back. The Mach number of the heavier species was Mach 15. They saw an increase in temperature behind the shock wave to 33,000 Kelvin, as would be predicted by an Euler simulation. Electrons, because of their small mass, had a very small Mach number. They should not have seen a rise in temperature, and they do not. This data acquisition was, and they remain at 300 Kelvin. This data acquisition was after the first iteration, therefore temperature rose. Let's take a look at what happens as we progress in time. The temperature of the ions increases because they collide and exchange energy with the other species, which were at a much higher temperature. Then the temperature of all the species also decreases. This is because at such high temperatures, more ionization is taking place. This requires energy which is taken in from the flow, and thus the temperature of all the gases decreases and till an equilibrium is achieved. So I want to point out two things here. First, an Euler simulation would have predicted a temperature of 33,000 Kelvin, while ionization decreased the temperature, which is good. Second, the presence of electrons could be felt, because the Mach number of electrons was subsonic, their presence could be felt upstream. Therefore, the temperature of the gases upstream of the shock wave was also changed. There was a slight increase in temperature upstream of the shock wave. Next, we are looking at the effect of charge separation. Does charge separation occur? X-axis again is the domain length. X equal to 0 corresponds to the location of the shock wave. On the y-axis is the number density, which is the number of particles per unit volume. Black again are the electrons, and green are the ions. And we see that because ions were supersonic, their density increased behind the shock wave. Electrons were subsonic. They shouldn't have seen a rise in density. But to conserve charge, conservation of charge requires that every ion should have an electron. Therefore, the initial condition we start with has a rise in density of the ions. Electrons too. With time, we see that because more ionization is taking place, the number of charged particles is increasing. Second, electrons are subsonic. Their effect is being felt upstream. Therefore, there is a rise in density of the electrons upstream of the shock wave. This produces separation of charge, and electric forces come into play. What this does is, here we are looking at some of the normalized quantities for electrons, and I want you to focus on the velocity. We see that the electric forces on the electrons has increased the density of the electrons above the mean velocity. So, yes, charge separation occurs in the vicinity of a shock wave due to the small mass of electrons, which makes them subsonic. It influences the temperature of the gas upstream of the shock wave, and the effect of induced electric forces is that the electrons are accelerated above the mean flow. The third experiment I did was to study the effect of applied magnetic field on ionized gases. Researchers for the past 50 years have been studying this problem for both experimentally and numerically, where they measure the effect of applied magnetic field on the drag experienced by a solid body. However, as quoted by Bretune at the 9th International Workshop in Magnetoplasma Aerodynamics in 2010, there has been a relatively low success in the numerical community in predicting the effects of applied magnetic field. And the error of the margin of error lies between 20 to 48%. So I wanted to study if this fuller formulation of the governing equations could predict some of these effects well. So I simulated this experiment, which was done by Seaman et al. At Northwestern University, where they equipped a sphere cylinder body. This is a different body, completely different dimensions from the previous experiment. They equipped it with an electromagnet which produced magnetic field, and in presence of the magnetic field, the charged particles were affected. The net result was an increase in drag on the body. The free stream conditions were ionized argon gas at 2500 Kelvin, pressure was 28 pascals, the free stream velocity was 2500 meter per second, the free stream density was 6 times 10 raised by negative 4 kilograms per meter cube, and the Mach number was 2.7. There was the degree of ionization was 1% in the free stream. We simulate this experiment by solving a full set of Navier-Stokes equations for every species with thermochemical non-equilibrium. The electromagnet was modeled as a dipole sitting at the center of the sphere. This was done because they measured that distribution in the experiment. The effect of magnetic field was included in the fluid dynamic equations as a Lorentz force and Joule heating term. The equations were converged to a steady state, and here is the convergence history of the various species in presence of a magnet and in absence of a magnet and in presence of a magnet. X-axis here is the number of iterations. The y-axis is the maximum residual in density for the three species. Red are the neutral species, pink squares are the ions, and orange are the electrons. And we call it a converged solution after the maximum error has fallen by about 6 orders of magnitude in all the three species. A similar behavior was seen in presence of a magnet. Then after the equations converged, the forces were calculated as, in absence of a magnetic field, they were calculated as contributions from the pressure forces and viscous stresses. Then in presence of the magnetic field, the charged species experienced a Lorentz force, which is given by J cross P, and they applied an equal and opposite force on the electromagnet, which has to be included in the final form to calculate the forces on the on the body. Here are some of the results for drag comparison. X-axis is the magnetic interaction parameter, which is a number that scales with the square of applied magnetic field. Y-axis is the percentage increase in drag. The open circles are the experiment, and the line through them with squares, filled squares, is our simulation. And we are able to match the experimental data well. Most of the increase in drag is from the electromagnetic component of the force, and we did see a small decrease in viscous drag too, but a large increase in the electromagnetic drag, and the net result is here. So with this experiment, we validated the equations, the numerical procedure, by comparing with experiments. Then we also verified or validated that a large portion of the increase in drag is from electromagnetic forces. With this, I would like to summarize my talk. So we started with a problem that was very complex, had all these complex physics going on, and we decided to model them. But the modeling itself was very complex, consisted of large number of equations tightly coupled with chemical models and things. And in addition, there were numerical challenges associated with the stiffness in the equations as well as the numerical procedures. So in my PhD, I developed a numerical procedure to solve these equations, how to discretize them and the boundary conditions, how to solve them to convergence. And I implemented these equations for a general mixture of gases on unstructured meshes for complex geometries in a code that runs in parallel and is open source, so free for anyone to use. And all detailed verification and validation was presented with 3 test cases. So in my PhD, I developed a 3-dimensional framework for simulating reacting hypersonic flows with the highest level of thermochemical non-equilibrium for continuum flows. In the process, I also developed the boundary conditions, including characteristic-based and cold wall catalytic boundary conditions. Then the full set of equations were implemented in an open source solver that runs in parallel, uses unstructured meshes for 3 dimensions, any mixture of gases, and the equations converge to a steady state. They're also capable of time-accurate solutions. Then I verified and validated the equations and the numerical procedure with the 3 test cases with published data. And in the final thesis, I will also include a comparison of this approach with the drift diffusion approach to test the differences. Part of the future work includes that my implementation is only for monatomic gases right now. We need to extend to diatomic gases. And this is actually an ongoing work. Another student, Sean Copeland, in the lab is already working on it, and this is under testing. Then the effect of applied magnetic field that I studied on drag augmentation is only a small part of the bigger problem. It's a much challenging problem where experimentalists have measured an increase or sometimes a decrease in heat flux, while numerical experiments have not been able to study it with the full satisfaction or full. Then the results, the implementation I presented is only for laminar flows, while we should, a good future step would be to implement turbulence models to study the effect of turbulence in these flows. Because when they go to a little denser regions where densities are higher, Reynolds number increases and turbulence plays a big part in the net rate of heat transfer to these vehicles. It can be as much as 5 to 6 times compared to the rate of heat transfer from laminar flows. And lastly, this formulation of the governing equations includes the highest level of thermochemical non-equilibrium, meaning we do not assume equilibrium either in momentum equations or in the translational energy of the various species. A very natural next step would be to couple it with a particle solver, because equilibrium exists when there are a lot of collisions. Non-equilibrium is when the collisions are not enough to equilibrate. Particle solvers are used when fluid dynamic equations fail, and this is a very natural step to combine the 2 approaches. With this, I would like to thank my committee members. I'll start with Professor Macropelli. Thank you for chairing my defense, and thank you for agreeing to be a reader on my committee. I also want to thank you for all the advice I've gotten throughout my PhD. I came to talk to you so often, and you always gave me the right advice and pointed me in the right direction if I was doing something that was not very feasible. And really, thank you. I also want to thank you, Professor Close, for agreeing to be a member of my defense committee. I want you to know that I am modeling plasmas because I took your class, and that's when I realized that there were so many problems with some of the things I was doing, and then I got into this. And that has proven very beneficial to me, so thank you. Professor McCormack, I don't know how to... I kind of assumed that I was also one of your students along with Daehoon and Jongkyu. I have been seeing you every Friday for the past 2 years without appointments. I just come assuming that, yes, I have a meeting with you. And those have been so helpful to me because everything I've learned about the physics of hypersonic flows has been from you. And even the classes I took with you were so beneficial. I never brought my computer to any of our meetings, and still I learned so much. Thank you. Francisco. Thank you. You played an advisory role in my PhD. I mean, everything I presented today has been because of you. And I don't think I would have defended for another 6 to 8 months or a year if it weren't for you. Professor Alonso, why do I have to do this? You're the best advisor I could get, really. I think the best decision I made after coming to Stanford was that I came and talked to you about the possibility of me joining your lab. I was allowed to work on whatever I wanted, and you gave me the freedom to talk to the best in the field, and it was such a healthy environment. I completely enjoyed. Yeah, thanks. I also want to thank Professor Springer, who spent an awful amount of time in helping me organize my presentation. This is my presentation. I also want to thank Liza, Robin, Ralph, Patrick, Jane, Grace, William, Carolyn, and Karina for all the help I've gotten. It was just so easy to be here because of you guys. I also have to thank the Aerospace Design Lab, my friends in Aero. Yeah, I had a very good time. Tom Kahneman, Tom Taylor for reading my thesis, all my literature papers, Sean Copeland for being my partner in this crime. Everyone, guys. I love my lab.
You could stay for another 5 years.
Oh, I hope no. I also want to thank my other friends who are not in my lab: Jongkyu, Tyhoon, Supreet, Ceci, Bhupesh, who's getting married tomorrow and is here, and some of my friends who've flown from Virginia, who I believe have flown for me. And lastly, I want to thank my family, my parents-in-law, my brother, sister, and Kuldeep. First, I'll thank my parents. My parents have really gone out of the way to raise me and give me the freedom to come to America and study here. They also paid for part of my tuition at Stanford. Yeah. And Kuldeep, the past 7 or 8 years I've known you have been the best. You're the best thing that happened to me. Thank you. That's all I have.
And I guess now we have time for questions from the audience. We'll ask the committee members to reserve their questions for the closed session.
I have two. Rita, have you had a chance, or do you plan to, and maybe I missed it in your future work, but compare your results with simulations run with the DPLR or LoRa code?
Yeah, that would be really nice. And actually, because I'm a foreign national, I am not allowed to use those codes. But Sean Copeland is actually going to do that. Says as his partner. Yeah.
And my other one is you started out with the wind turbine work. Have you had a chance to go back and fly some of this, or what do you think?
Yes, that is the goal. That's why this code has been developed in a very general way, so that we can use it for any mixture of gases. That's why I have Gauss's law, because those plasma I should talk about first why wind turbines and plasma. I wanted to apply plasma actuators on wind turbines, and to model plasma actuators, we required a nice code. Because plasma actuators work when a strong electric field is applied, which creates ionized gases, and we have to simulate that. And the goal was to get to that. And that's why this code was developed with a very general formulation for unsteady in 3 dimensions, and coupled with Gauss's law. So this is, I think, an ideal environment to simulate some of those flows.
Other questions? Sean?
This is a very complex environment and a very challenging problem. What part of your research was the most difficult in the past several years?
The most difficult.
The most difficult challenge to overcome, which one was it?
Treating the source terms. The interaction between the various species are so strong that the source terms are very large, which makes these equations very, very stiff. We have to have a very detailed information about the Jacobian of these source terms, and not just an exact Jacobian. That doesn't help. You have to kind of, for every problem, choose what terms to keep to add to improve the stiffness in the linearized system of equations. And it took me almost a few months to get the Jacobian right, such that I had diagonal dominance and could structure through the linear solver. Thanks.
Well, one, actually, you put out these Did you do this by hand or did
Yeah.
you didn't use maple or something like that?
No, I did it by hand because some of the, it's not that these, I had to selectively choose which terms to differentiate and which not to, because some of the terms were from experiment, and if I differentiated them, then they produced peaks or they were not very good after differentiation, so I had to neglect those.
So I got several other pieces of information. How many species were you using in these argon?
Argon has 3 species, neutral atoms, and it only ionizes to produce argon ions and electrons at these temperatures.
So just
Of
3
course.
species?
Yes.
And all calculations have shown this. They're all argon.
Yeah, yes.
So although you in principle could do 300 species, you haven't detected it.
300 species?
You could find that.
You could maybe
to
say
air
that.
or something like that.
But for air,
Air,
how many
there are
species
7
would you do?
species. The objective was to do it for 21 species for plasma actuators. We'll get to that, but somehow, slowly.
So shows that convergence is just somewhere along the line near the beginning, but I don't know whether you can find this now again. I'm just curious. Yes. with the- Not that one, it was an early one.
Yeah.
Wrong with the rotor cuff. That's what we found.
Yeah, this one. So I have 2 questions. Firstly, these iterations are implicit timestamps, is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
So how many LUSGS or whatever inside each timestamp?
1.
So you didn't iterate inside the timestamp?
No. This, yeah, no. 1 is LUSGS at every time step.
Okay, well, you just care about the steady state, I see.
Yes, that's one.
So can you explain what is?
This behavior,
Yes, any idea what causes it? I've seen it happen sometimes too. I don't know what you think. Some kind of period there of about several hundred iterations.
What's your time step
huh?
per iteration? Are you iterating in time? Is this a
Yes.
The time.
Yes, the number of iterations is, these
But
are
this
not,
is a steady state calculation.
yes, so it's, the time does not have a physical meaning here.
In the order of the value of the was very low. So
Yeah.
it's numerical thing because when we are in -5, it's physically convert. But I think that's numerical stuff. But
And
not
on the right hand one is continuing oscillation. Speculate that there might be some kind of wave detection
Kind of wave,
process.
or minor oscillation with shock wave, even if it's just a portion of a cell.
We are speaking with drop 5 hours when fever and then start up to see. So
Mhm.
But the error mode, however small, may be something that is traveling rather than hanging, although she did
Yeah.
local time stuffing, so it's kind of
Yeah.
to fly with a physical phenomenon.
So you showed the discretization with the first order row, but I presume you got a second order. Is that right? In fact,
The examples I showed are for first order accurate.
first order accurate.
Yes.
So you didn't try to go with this.
In
high
the
order
convective
accurate.
fluxes, right?
In the convective fluxes, the viscous fluxes are second order
Yeah,
accurate.
but with the convective flux is the first order.
Yes. But, yeah. We were able to obtain good results even with first order accuracy in convective fluxes is because these equations are very source dominated. So the source terms are the ones that matter a lot. Plus the viscosity of these flows is very high. So the viscous terms, which are second order accurate, also.
Okay. So in the first example, was that axisymmetric?
No, I did a 3-dimensional formulation because, huh?
Experimental geometry was that?
Yes.
But you did it in 3D
I did it in 3D.
for a sector or for the whole,
No, for a sector.
for a sector?
Yes.
So what was the boundary condition of the sector boundary?
Here, symmetry
Yeah.
boundary condition. So no flux through it.
I like to thesis.
Other questions?
So, with electron flow, there are like 2 types, right? There's the thermal speed and there's the bulk flow speed. So I can understand the thermal speed is like really high, which is why the electron Mach number is low. But if the electrons are attached to the ions, that Mach number is not very relevant, right? So in your case, are the electrons not attached to ions? There are no oscillations, nothing, none of that stuff happening?
No, we're treating these as free electrons.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Electrons
if-
are treated as a completely different species.
But if you have such a re-entry body or anything entering into an atmosphere where the electrons are coupled to the ions over there, then you don't expect the bulk flow speed of electrons to be different from the bulk flow speed of ions, right?
Yes, we do not. We have the speeds of ions and electrons is very similar here.
So then the Mach number.
Mach number is small because the mass of electrons is small. Their speeds are similar, the speed of ions and electrons, but their Mach numbers are different.
Yeah, but still that shouldn't make any difference to the flow phenomena, because the electrons will just go with the speed of the ions. Like they'll behave as if they are like coupled with the ions, and if there is strong coupling, otherwise no.
We cannot say that two fluids which are moving with the same velocity are similar. If they have different temperatures or if they have different kinds of species, we cannot say that they should behave similarly. It's like saying water moving at 10,000 at 1 kilometer per second and air moving at the same. Yeah. If the Mach number and Reynolds number were the same, then we could. Yeah.
A couple more questions.
So do you use Rose scheme for all of the computations?
Yes.
Could you discuss maybe how you got around some of the difficulties that Rose scheme presents as high markers? It has some risk of artificial dissipation issues.
At low Mach numbers.
No, but at high Mach numbers it tends to be unstable a lot.
Okay, yes. The Mach numbers that I'm dealing with here are not very high. What we have is the free stream temperatures are high. The Mach numbers are like 1, in one test case it was 2 and the other it was 4. So it worked for our case.
Yeah.
However, if you go to higher Mach numbers, Rose does not converge to a good solution, and we can use something like a Steger warming or a different scheme for that.
So you didn't run into any carbon fuels?
I did not run into carbon cliff because we are using unstructured meshes, so we did not run into that problem.
Just like every time. So this concludes the public portion of the exam, and then we're going to close session in about 5 minutes.